the National Pork Producers Council for sponsoring our entire event. We've certainly heard from a lot of different sectors, but the energy issue is clearly one that there's a lot of emphasis on, and I think a clear message in that first panel. Very excited to hear what the second has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, we're going to move forward with our second panel, and I want to thank the audience for being supportive of all this. Sorry we had to cut off on the questions. We'll go first to, well, let me introduce the panel first. To my right, Marianne Brown, VP Federal Affairs, Sempra Energy, a company I've gotten to know, and we have a Louisiana connection. I know her brother well, who's a surgeon, who we did some things together back in my former career. We also have to Maryam's right, Lorraine Hawley, Director of International Government Relations, Archer Daniels Midland. Welcome, glad to have you. And then, and last but not least on this, David Goldwyn, who I got to know David sort of peripherally when we were working on LNG exports and the Cheniere project down in my former congressional district. David is now the principal at Goldwyn Global Strategies, former U.S. State Department Special Envoy, Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, and someone very knowledgeable about these geopolitical developments and the implications of getting a successful NAFTA renegotiation. So with that, let's start with Maryam.
Hello everyone, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. As Charles said, my name is Marianne Brown and I'm Vice President for Federal Government Affairs for Sempra Energy. I wanted to start by thanking WITA very much for what you do, bringing the trade community together to have discussions on important issues like this. So thanks very much, Ken, for what it is you do. And I also very much appreciate, as the previous panel said, the opportunity to have the Honorable Charles Boustany here with us from the great state of Louisiana, my home state. And thank you so much for your leadership over the many years on trade and for leading us in this discussion. So a little background on Sempra Energy, because I think what my company can bring to the table is some specific or practical experience of many of the issues that the previous panel raised on the benefits of NAFTA to the energy sector. So Sempra Energy is a San Diego-based energy services company. We have approximately 16,000 employees serving 32 million customers in the United States, Mexico, Peru, and Chile. Our Mexican subsidiary, IEnova, is the largest private energy company in Mexico. That makes it the second largest energy company in Mexico after Pemex. Our business investments there include natural gas transmission, distribution, generation, and storage. We have significant renewable investments in wind and solar and have entered into the petroleum liquids business as well. With these investments, we are the largest natural gas pipeline company in Mexico and delivering a lot of the United States gas that is being exported to Mexico. As of 2016, we have invested $7 billion in Mexico. On both sides of the border, the investments that Sempra and IEnova have been making have been supporting jobs in construction, engineering, IT, accounting, and many more. And in addition to these jobs, and this was spoken to in the first panel, the investments we make support reliability. Sergio talked a lot about the electric reliability benefits of the US and Canada connection. On the Mexico side, there's a significant reliability connection with the states of California and Texas, which are very large economies. And our investments also help address greenhouse gases and local pollution concerns. Our investments in natural gas in Mexico help switch from fuel oil in Mexico to clean burning natural gas, as well as the renewable generation investments. In our view, a growing energy trade partnership between US, Mexico, and Canada is a win-win. So specifics on NAFTA and energy and our views. North American energy integration over the last 20 years really is a NAFTA success story. And this integration has been positive for energy security. It's been very positive for consumers. Guy was talking about that a lot, especially on the refining side. And it's been very significant for economic growth for all three countries. With respect to Mexico specifically, we enjoy an energy trade surplus of about $11 billion last year. Thanks to NAFTA, Mexico is the #1 export destination for United States natural gas, and it is the #1 export destination for our refined products. Last year, we exported 60% of our natural gas to Mexico, and this year, 50% of the gasoline that the United States has exported has gone to Mexico. Just this year, natural gas exports to Mexico have increased from 3 BCF a day to 5 BCF a day. And a lot of that gas comes from Texas, and it's exported to Mexico through Sempra Energy gas infrastructure pipelines. And I can say this from the Sempra Energy perspective, those pipelines and that equipment that exports that gas from the U.S. and distributes it through Mexico, almost half of that equipment comes from U.S. suppliers, U.S. steel, U.S. equipment, U.S. compressors, U.S. turbines. Now, all of these facts and figures are to make one bottom line point. The energy value chain in Mexico is wide and it is deep, and it can be deeper. And we're very supportive of it being deeper, and that's why Sempra testified earlier this year before the Committee on Ways and Means to talk about some policies that we think would help improve and modernize NAFTA. At the very top of the list was something that was talked about extensively in the previous panel, is the idea of locking in the energy reforms and to reflect the current market openness that we now have in Mexico. Another one of the ideas that we presented was expanding the investment chapter to include investment agreements. Very often in the energy business, particularly in Mexico, our counterparty is the government, and it would be a good improvement to expand the investment chapter to include investment agreements, as is done in many of the more modern trade agreements today. And the third recommendation we made dealt with more certainty and transparency on the cross-border permitting process. I think a lot was learned from the Keystone process on the lack of certainty on process, and I think that there's this NAFTA is a way to be able to address those concerns. So these are the kinds of reforms that we think will give us a more powerful NAFTA. And a stronger NAFTA is key to the administration accomplishing its very laudable goals on energy dominance. However, we are very concerned about the current direction of the NAFTA discussions. Rather than modernizing NAFTA, there are proposals that we're concerned would weaken it. The proposals that would reduce the investment protections, limit the ability to use the ISDS mechanism, and also very concerning is the 5-year termination proposal. These are all very concerning. And energy businesses are definitely throwing up major red flags, and business flags matter in trade agreements. In my view, trade agreements are different from other government-to-government agreements because business is the intended beneficiary of these agreements. And without business buy-in, that they are going to invest and trade under these agreed terms, then what's the purpose of the agreement? These kinds of proposals that have been put forward will force companies to have to make some really tough decisions about whether or not it makes sense for long-term infrastructure investments. And if that's the case, then all of these good benefits that we've been talking about all day, about increased U.S. exports to Mexico, we risk the rate of that slowing down and significantly. And I think also very importantly, Mexico becomes encouraged or disincentivized, Mexico becomes incentivized to look to get their energy products from elsewhere. And if NAFTA were terminated, I know that there's a long list from many different industries about why this would be a bad thing, but one very tangible risk I think that the energy industry can bring to the table is the legal authority that justifies these many natural gas pipelines that cross the border would be compromised because there's no longer a free trade agreement underpinning the pipeline permit from the US. So none of these are outcomes that anybody wants, and it is in no party's interest. And it's why we continue to emphasize the enormous benefit that NAFTA has been to the US energy industry. Energy is absolutely a NAFTA success story. And so our hope is that negotiators preserve these many benefits and while finding consensus to modernize and improve the agreement. And this will benefit US workers, our economy, and the environment. And that's our hope on where we'll end up. And look forward to the discussion of the panel.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. It's an honor to join you all, very distinguished colleagues sitting up here on the panel with me. My name is Lorraine Hawley. As noted before, I'm the Director for International Government Relations with ADM, Archer Daniels Midland Company. We're a global agribusiness company operating in 160 countries around the world, and my business guys say all the time, we live and breathe by NAFTA. So we very much appreciate all the comments earlier about first, do no harm. We very much support that. And we do see opportunities for modernization of the NAFTA agreement as we go through this process. And one key area where we do see strong opportunity for modernization is on energy. I think it's been well noted this morning that the landscape for the energy sector 23 years ago when NAFTA was negotiated and implemented is vastly different than what we see today. In the US, we had not yet seen a natural gas revolution. We had not seen the strong growth of the ethanol industry and the role that biofuels could play in providing cleaner and competitively priced fuels. In Mexico, the energy market was completely closed to outside investment, and Canada, though a major supplier of oil and gas, had not gone through revolutions like the oil sands. So it's a very different energy landscape that we see today. We believe that the energy chapter modernization, or the opportunity to modernize the energy chapter, really is an opportunity to incorporate and reflect upon the technology and policy advances we've seen over the last 23 years. And identifying and incorporating measures to better integrate the North American energy market can make trade of energy products more efficient, allowing consumers and our environments to benefit. Better integrating our markets can also advance efforts to improve North American energy security. So, as you might imagine, as ADM is one of the largest ethanol producers, we're looking at this from a renewable fuel standpoint. ADM has a long history in the ethanol and biodiesel industries and was a leader in the establishment and the success of the U.S. ethanol industry. We've been producing ethanol since 1978, and today we manufacture and market over 1.6 billion gallons of ethanol per year. And what we've seen over the last 23 years is that the demand for ethanol around the world has grown. We see E10 is the most common blend of ethanol here in the US, and we are moving in some places to move to E15. E10 is also used in Canada. And as a part of the ambitious energy reform process, Mexico has recently changed their policy to allow for ethanol blending at 10% by volume as well. So what we see for renewable fuels is there is a real synergy in the policies that have been adopted and implemented, and we really have an opportunity through a NAFTA energy chapter modernization to incorporate those and really enhance the regulatory cooperation around those standards. So I'd like to, just to put this in context, talk a little bit more about what we're seeing both in Mexico and Canada. In June, the Mexican government moved to increase the maximum amount of ethanol that can be blended into the Mexican gasoline supplies. That amount was increased from 5.8% to 10% in the areas outside of Mexico City, Monterrey, and Guadalajara. And this move really reflected the input from a wide variety of stakeholders across government, industry, the academic community, and social interest groups. And the decision to increase the ethanol blend rate was really predicated upon the environmental benefits that can be derived from using ethanol, and the government of Mexico's recognition of that. So the opening of the rest of Mexico is predicated upon a study that's being conducted by the Mexican Petroleum Institute, or the IMP. The IMP is studying the impacts that ethanol may have on ozone and CO2 emissions in some of Mexico's major metropolitan areas. And pending positive outcomes from that study, which we think there will be, and if the study shows that there are benefits from ethanol and no harm caused by ethanol, we expect that the government of Mexico will move then to open the rest of the country to ethanol blending at 10% by volume as well. And what that does is create a really nice regulatory coherence with what we're doing here in the U.S. with ethanol blended at 10% by volume. In Canada, the government is also pursuing an aggressive suite of policies for renewable fuels and is promoting the enhanced use of both biodiesel and ethanol. Back in 2010, the Canadian government instituted a policy that requires 5% of the national gasoline supply to be based on renewables, or to come from renewables. So what we've seen is there is increasing demand for ethanol and also for biodiesel because of those policies. Canada's moves is also driven really by environmental interests. They're using more biodiesel and ethanol to meet their objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 17% by 2020. And to support these efforts, the Canadian government has rolled out a comprehensive strategy that includes increasing retail availability of renewable fuels through regulation, supporting the expansion of Canadian production of renewable fuels, assisting farmers to seize opportunities in the sector, and accelerating the commercialization of new technologies. So we've seen a lot of the synergies play out across our three countries. For environmental reasons, ethanol is cleaner. It's been proven to reduce CO2 emissions and toxics in air. And ethanol can and is playing a key role in ensuring that the NAFTA bloc is reducing CO2 emissions overall. I also noted earlier that there are economic benefits that come from the use of ethanol. Ethanol is cheaper over time. Over this past year, we've shown that the current spread in the price between ethanol and MTBE, and I just want to underscore, MTBE is not used here in the United States. In fact, it's banned in 25 to 50 U.S. states. But MTBE is the oxygen of choice that has been used historically in Mexico. But the price spread between ethanol and MTBE is 40 cents per gallon. So with ethanol being cheaper than MTBE. So that's a significant savings to consumers. And the 5-year historical data shows that the price spread is more than 70 cents per gallon, with ethanol being less expensive than MTBE. So I think that's another thing that Mexico is looking at quite actively as they make a decision to increase the use of ethanol in their gasoline supplies. So what do we see for NAFTA? We see that the NAFTA countries are using ethanol as an oxygenate for gasoline, and it just makes sense, given this opportunity that we have, to fully harmonize standards within the NAFTA Energy chapter. Long term, ensuring that our three countries benefit from a fully integrated ethanol fuels trade. With respect to the US and Canada, we also see that there's an opportunity to include provisions that will ensure regulatory coherence around biodiesel and to better integrate that trade, which is already quite strong. So we are very supportive of a robust energy chapter, of a modernization to the energy chapter as it currently exists in NAFTA to better reflect these technology and policy advancements that we've seen. And we are confident that with the modernized energy chapter and the inclusion of 21st century renewable fuels provisions, we are going to be better able to meet our environmental and economic goals, and to better integrate our markets and make sure our consumers and our environments are benefiting as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. David, you're up.